Paul and Martha keep their relationship a secret from their classmates until graduation and plan their future in Boston. The A+ hung on the bulletin board outside Mr. Hendricks's room for a full week before winter break, our names typed side by side on a crisp white sheet of paper that every junior and senior in AP Biology walked past like it meant nothing. To them, maybe it didn't. To me, it meant everything. Standing there a beat too long, pretending to check my phone while I stared at Graves/Jones, 98%, exceptional depth of research and methodology, I felt Martha brush past my elbow on her way to the library. She didn't look at me. She never did. But the corner of her mouth curled up just enough to dimple her left cheek before she tucked her chin into that oversized hoodie and vanished. We kept it secret, not because I was ashamed, God no, but because she asked me to. Made me swear on that first afternoon, still dressed less and tangled in my sheets, her glasses fogged up from the heat we'd made. Nobody knows, she said. At school, we're nothing, just partners on a project. Can you do that? I nodded, thinking it would be easy. It wasn't. Every morning I saw her in the hallway, tugging her sweatshirt sleeves over her wrists, eyes down, shoulders curled inward, and all I could think about was the way her bare back arched when she came. How her melons swung heavy and free when she rode me, the faint blue veins tracing rivers toward those dusty pink nips. How she tasted, clean and sweet and a little salty. In the cafeteria I sat with the team, laughing at Dave's dumb jokes, but my focus was pinned to the corner table where Martha read a dog-eared sci-fi paperback and didn't speak to anyone. Her lunch was always an apple and a granola bar. I wanted to walk over, sit down, ask what page she was on. Instead, I threw a fry at Dave and called him a simp. Weekends became ours. My parents' retreat schedule was a calendar we both memorized, and her mother worked double shifts every other Saturday. When my house was empty, Martha would arrive at noon in her armor, baggy jeans, shapeless sweater, hair in a messy bun, and within 10 minutes that armor would be a puddle on the living room floor. She'd stand there in her lace bra and thong, the same black set she'd worn the first time, and give me a look halfway between a dare and an invitation. Half the time we didn't make it upstairs. The kitchen counter saw a lot of action. The couch too. Once, memorably, the laundry room, because I'd been folding towels, and she decided my concentration was better spent elsewhere. Her bedroom was smaller. A twin bed with a creaky frame, pale lavender walls covered in physics posters and a periodic table, a closet stuffed with clothes that hid her body. But her mother worked until 8, and her brother Oliver had after-school programs, so we learned to use the window of time. I learned how to be quiet. She learned how to make me forget my own name. Then came the parents. My mother ambushed me with an invitation. She'd heard from another parent that I was working very hard with that nice Jones girl, and insisted I bring her to Sunday dinner. Martha sat across from my father at the dining room table, wearing a cardigan buttoned to her throat and those thick glasses, and discussed medical ethics with him for 2 straight hours. My father has been a pastor for 23 years. He can quote Leviticus from memory and thinks evolution is a compelling theory but not a complete one. Martha, in her quiet, methodical voice, explained the biochemistry of CRISPR gene editing and its implications for congenital disease. By dessert, he was calling her remarkable. She met my mother's piano. It sat in the corner of the living room, untouched since my grandmother died, and when Martha sat down at the bench, her own piano still broken, she hadn't touched keys in over a year, her hands hovered above the ivory like she was asking permission. Then she played, not a song I knew, something slow and melancholy that built into a complicated cascade of notes, her fingers moving with a confidence I'd only ever seen when she had my meat in her mouth. My mother cried. I stood in the doorway and my chest hurt, in a way that had nothing to do with sex. Afterward, Martha said, "Your dad thinks I'm a good influence." I kissed her forehead. "You are." Her mother's house was a narrow 2-story with a sagging front porch and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. I met Mrs. Jones 3 weeks later, over a dinner of chicken pot pie that I ate 3 helpings of. Oliver, her 10-year-old brother, recited the names of every pterosaur known to paleontology while I listened, genuinely interested. Later he showed me his fossil collection, rocks mostly, a few genuine fragments, and Martha watched from the doorway with an expression I couldn't read. When we were alone in the kitchen doing dishes, she said, "Nobody's ever taken him seriously before." I shrugged. Kid knows his thing. Her mother pulled me aside before I left. Short woman, tired eyes, a nurse's hands that had seen decades of work. "You're different," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "You hurt her, I know where you live." "Understood." She smiled. It was Martha's smile, or Martha had hers. Good. The letters came the same week. 2 thick envelopes with embossed crests, 1 crimson, 1 cardinal. Martha got MIT, full ride, biomedical engineering cohort hand *** ed by a professor who'd seen her science fair project freshman year, some device for monitoring her brother's epileptic episodes. I got Harvard pre-med track with a spot on the Crimson football team that would keep my father from disowning me. I'd been terrified to tell him I wasn't going to seminary. Martha had sat with me for that conversation, too, in my living room, her hand resting on my knee under the table. When I finished my carefully rehearsed speech about medicine and service, and healing the body as much as the soul, my father looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Martha. "You did this," he said. I just helped him say what he already knew. A pause, then the faintest nod. Harvard's a good school. That was the closest thing to a blessing I'd ever gotten. We celebrated at her house on a Friday night in early March. Her mother had taken Oliver to a specialist appointment in Boston overnight, not back until noon Saturday. The house was ours. We planned it carefully. Candles, her mother's good sheets, a playlist on her phone, something ambient and slow, but planning went out the window the moment I stepped through the front door. She was waiting in the living room barefoot, wearing a white sundress that stopped mid-thigh. White, no bra. I could see the shadows of her nips through the thin cotton, the curve of her melons unrestrained, the way the fabric pulled taut across her hips. Her hair was down, honey-colored waves cascading past her shoulders. She'd left her glasses on the side table. For the first time in months, she wasn't hiding anything. "Hi," she said. The door clicked shut behind me. I dropped my bag. "I love you," I said. First time those words had left my mouth in that order to anyone, and they came out so naturally that I didn't even realize I'd said them until her expression shifted. Her eyes, those hazel eyes, unshielded, went glassy. Her lips parted. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick strides and kissed me so hard my back hit the doorframe. "Say it again," she breathed against my mouth. "I love you, Martha Jones." She devoured me, her hands fisted in my shirt, pulling me down, her mouth open and urgent. I walked her backward, our feet tangling, her sundress riding up, and we left a trail of clothes from the living room to the narrow staircase. My jacket hit the coffee table, her dress pooled on the second step, my shirt draped over the banister. Her panties, white lace, a matching set she'd bought for this, landed on the hallway floor outside her bedroom. My jeans tangled around my ankles until I kicked them free. By the time we reached her bed, she was completely dressless, and I was stumbling out of my boxers, my meat already throbbing, a bead of juice glistening at the tip. The room smelled like her, lavender and old books and that clean, warm scent of her skin. Her bed was a twin, neatly made, the pale purple comforter smooth. She pushed me onto it. "I want to taste you while you taste me," she said, climbing over my body. She covered my face, her knees planted on either side of my head, her cat hovering an inch above my mouth. Clean bare as always, the lips pink and already glistening with pique. From this angle she looked obscene. The long line of her torso, the underslopes of her melons hanging above me, nips tight and pebbled, the faint blue veins branching beneath her pale skin. Her scent was intoxicating, musky and sweet, and so her. I grabbed her hips and pulled her down onto my mouth. She gasped, her thighs clenched against my ears. Her back arched, and one hand flew to the headboard while the other reached behind her and found my meat. Her fingers wrapped around my shaft, slick with the juice already leaking, and she guided me into her mouth in one fluid motion. Wet heat engulfed me. My groan vibrated against her happy button. What followed was a feedback loop of pleasure. Every stroke of my tongue across her swollen bud made her moan around my meat, and the vibration of her moans shot straight through to my spine. I traced the length of her slit, dipping inside her, tasting the tang of her peak as it coated my lips, my chin, my tongue. Her inner walls were already fluttering, hot and silky, and when I sealed my mouth around her happy button and sucked, her hips bucked against my face. She swallowed whole me in response. Nose to my testes, chin against my pelvis, throat working around the head of my meat like she was swallowing me whole. No reflex reaction. She'd learned that months ago, and she used it now without mercy, pulling back only to lick the sensitive underside of the tip before swallowing me again. I worked 2 fingers inside her, curling them forward to stroke that rough patch on her anterior wall, and the sound she made was half wild. Her thighs trembled. Her rhythm on my meat stuttered. I sucked harder, flicked faster, felt the first wave of her peak building in the way her cat clenched around my fingers. "Paul," her voice was muffled around my shaft. I'm going to." She came with a shuddering cry, her spine bowing, her cat flooding my mouth with a rush of warm fluid that I swallowed greedily. Her inner muscles pulsed against my fingers in rhythmic waves. Her thighs clamped around my head so tight I could hear my own heartbeat. And through it all, she kept my meat in her mouth, her throat working unconsciously, until the tremors subsided and she collapsed sideways off me, gasping. I crawled over her before she could catch her breath, positioned myself between her legs. Her face was flushed, hair wild, lips swollen and wet, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "I need to be inside you," I said. She reached down and guided me herself. The head of my meat pressed against her entrance, swollen, slick, utterly drenched, and she was so ready that I slid into the hilt in one slow, relentless stroke. Her cat gripped me like a fist, hot and tight, and so wet I could feel her peak dripping down my testes. Her legs wrapped around my waist, ankles locking at the small of my back, pulling me deeper. "Like this," she murmured, her hands framing my face. "I want to see you." I started to move, deep, slow strokes that let me feel every inch of her, every ridge and fold of her inner walls caressing my shaft. The twin bed creaked under us. Her melons rocked with each deep, the heavy flesh shifting in hypnotic rhythm, nips brushing my chest when I leaned down to kiss her. Our mouths met again and again, tender, wet, tasting of her and me and something indefinably us. I shifted my weight to one elbow and brought my other hand to her melon, cupped its impossible weight, rolled her nip between my thumb and forefinger until it hardened to a tight, aching point. She arched into my touch, a broken moan escaping her lips. "Harder," she breathed. I sucked the nip into my mouth, laving it with my tongue, grazing it with my teeth, and her cat clenched around me so sharply I saw stars. I switched to the other melon, giving it the same attention, and beneath me she began to tremble. Her breathing went ragged, her nails dug into my shoulder blades. "Paul, I'm close." "Me too. Together, let's come together." I lifted my head, looked into her eyes. Her pupils were blown black, her lips parted, her expression hovering on the edge of release. I increased my rhythm, driving deeper, grinding my lower belly against her happy button on every downstroke, and when her inner walls began to flutter in warning, I let go. We came together, her peak hit like a breaking wave, her cat milking me in rhythmic pulses, hot and tight and unrelenting, and I spilled inside her with a shuddering groan, pulse after thick pulse of juice pumping deep into her body. She cried out my name, her back lifting off the mattress, her legs locked around me, her heels digging into my cheeks. For a long, suspended moment, there was nothing but sensation, the clench of her, the heat of her, the wet sounds of our bodies joined. Then she collapsed, and I collapsed on top of her, and we lay tangled and panting until our heartbeats slowed. "That was amazing," she whispered. "Every time with you is amazing." She kissed my shoulder. "Food, we need food, I'm starving." Dinner was cold leftover pizza eaten dressless at her kitchen table. She sat cross-legged on her chair, the candle from the living room flickering between us, and we talked about the future. MIT, Harvard, Cambridge, where both campuses sat just a river apart. Apartment hunting. Her brother's progress, my dad's grudging approval. The article she'd read about a new prosthetic limb that responded to neural signals. She talked with her hands, her melons jiggling with each gesture, the candlelight painting gold along the curves of her body, and I watched her with a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with sex. But after dinner, when she stood to clear the plates, she paused behind my chair, leaned down, her lips brushed my ear, and her hands slid down my stomach to find my half-hard meat. "I want round two," she said. "Cooch, now." The living room couch was a worn leather thing with a sag in the middle. I sat in that sag, and Martha straddled me, facing me, her knees planted on either side of my hips. Her melons were at perfect mouth height, and she lifted one and guided the nip to my lips as she reached between us and lined my meat up with her entrance. "Distract yourself," she said. I sucked her nips into my mouth, and she sank down on my shaft. The angle was incredible. She was still wet from before, still slick with my juice, and she took me to the hilt in one smooth motion that made us both groan. Her cat was tighter somehow like this, gripping me from base to tip, and when she started to ride, the sensation short-circuited my brain. She bounced, fast and eager, her cheeks slapping against my thighs, her melons jiggling inches from my face. I buried myself in her chest, licking and sucking and biting her nips, palming the heavy weight of each melon, squeezing until the flesh spilled through my fingers. Her moans filled the room, high-pitched and desperate. "Touch me," she gasped. "Please touch my happy button." My hand dropped between us, found the swollen nub, slick with her peak and rubbed tight, fast circles. She screamed. Literally screamed, her head thrown back, her throat working, and her cat clamped down around me as her peak crashed through her. I felt the hot gush of her release soak my lap, my thighs, the leather couch beneath us. "That's it," I growled. "Let go." She rode out the climax, her hips grinding, her breathing ragged, and when the tremors faded, she kissed me, deep and hungry, and then pulled off. Pulled off and stood, turned around, planted her knees on the edge of the couch cushion and bent forward, presenting her cheeks to me. "I want you in here," she said, reaching back to spread her cheeks. Her cat glistened below, but her focus was higher. "There's lube in the side table." I opened the drawer, found the bottle, slicked myself up, then coated 2 fingers and pressed them gently against her a-hole. She exhaled, and the ring of muscle softened, accepting me. I worked her open slowly, one finger, then two, scissoring gently until her tight pucker was relaxed and ready. Then I lined up, the head of my meat pressed against her, and I pushed. The resistance was familiar, that initial barrier of muscle that made her gasp and clench, and then the pop, the slide, the impossibly tight heat of her cheeks swallowing me inch by inch. She was panting by the time I bottomed out, her knuckles white where she gripped the back of the cooch. "Okay," I asked. "Better than okay," her voice was strained but steady. "Move, please." I moved, slow at first, letting her adjust, then faster when she started pushing back against me. The sight of my meat disappearing into her cheeks, the sound of our bodies meeting, the wet slap of my testes against her dripping cat, it was obscene. It was perfect. She dropped her head onto her forearms and let out a stream of incoherent sounds, moans, whimpers, fragments of my name, as I banged her with long, relentless strokes. And then she came. No building, no warning, just a sudden clench around my shaft, a sobbing cry, her whole body shaking as the peak ripped through her. But I didn't stop. I kept deeping, and 5 seconds later she came again, and again. Her cheeks milking me with each pulse, her cat dripping onto the cooch cushions. She lost count after 5. I lost myself in the rhythm, in the heat, in the way her body surrendered to me completely. "I'm gonna come," I grunted. "In me, come in my cheeks." I buried myself deep and let go. The release was staggering, hot jets of juice flooding her tight channel, pulsing out of me in waves that left me dizzy. She moaned at the sensation, clenching around me, drawing it out. I pulled out slowly, watched the pearly fluid leak from her stretched hole, a trickle against her pink skin. Then I collapsed back onto the cooch, and she collapsed against my chest. We kissed, soft, lazy kisses that tasted of salt and relief. Her body was limp, utterly spent. My fingers traced idle patterns down her spine. Then she stood, on shaky legs, looked down at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Pick up our clothes," she said. "Take them to my room. I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" "Trust me." I trusted her. I gathered the scattered garments, her dress, her panties, my jeans, everything from the trail we'd left, and carried the bundle to her bedroom. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the nightstand. Martha stood beside the bed, still dressless, holding something in her hands. A strap harness, black nylon straps, chrome buckles, and attached to the front. A toy, silicone, realistically shaped, maybe 6 inches long and slightly thicker than me, a pale flesh tone. My brain stuttered. "Martha, I'm not into hugs, I told you." "I know," she smiled, that same secret smile from the library months ago. "It's not for me, it's for you." I stared. "What?" "You're going to wear it." She crossed to me, pressing the harness against my chest. "I want to be double P, I want you and my cat and this." She tapped the silicone, in my cheeks, at the same time. The image hit me like a freight train. Martha on her hands and knees, stuffed full of me and this toy, stretched, overwhelmed. "You've been thinking about this," I said. "For months I've done the research, I've practiced with toys, I know I can take it, I just need you." I swallowed. My meat, which had softened after the last round, gave an interested twitch against my thigh. "Okay," I said. Her smile widened. "Okay." She helped me into the harness. It was more complicated than I expected, straps around my waist under my cheeks, adjusted so the toy sat snugly against my lower belly, just above my own meat. The base pressed into me and I could feel its weight, its presence. Martha knelt in front of me, checking the fit, her fingers brushing my testes as she tightened the straps, and by the time she was satisfied, I was half hard again. She noticed, "Let me help with that." Her mouth found my meat. Warm, wet, expert. She sucked me to full hardness with an efficiency that would have been clinical if it weren't so goddamn hot, hollowing her cheeks, working her tongue along the ridge of my head, cupping my testes in one hand. Her other hand wrapped around the toy and stroked it in rhythm, and the sight of her servicing us both made my knees weak. When I was rock hard and dripping, she pulled off with a wet pop and climbed onto the bed, on her hands and knees, back arched, cheeks in the air. "I'm ready," she said. The lube was still on the nightstand. I coated the toy thoroughly, applied another layer to my meat. The silicone glistened in the lamplight. I got behind her, positioned myself. My meat found her cat first, still wet, still ready, and I pushed into the hilt with a single, smooth stroke. She groaned, her fingers curling into the sheets. Then I angled my hips and pressed the tip of the toy against her a-hole. "Breathe," I said. She breathed, in, out. The tight ring of muscle gave way and the silicone slid in. 1 inch, 2. Oh, her voice cracked. "Oh my God." "Keep breathing." So full, Paul, I'm so full. I pushed deeper. The toy sank into her cheeks while my meat stayed buried in her cat, and I could feel the pressure of it through the harness, the base grinding against my pelvis, the tight heat of her body gripping us both. She was stretched to her limit, panting and trembling, but her hips pushed backward, asking for more. When I was fully seated, both shafts inside her, I paused, let her adjust. She was whimpering now, a constant stream of sound that wasn't pain, it was awe. You feel that? I asked. I feel everything, both of you, moving against each other. I can't. She broke off into a moan as I gave an experimental deep. Both shafts moved together, filling her from both angles, and the sound she made was something between a sob and a prayer. Maury, she begged, please, Maury. I gave her more, a slow, deep rhythm that dragged both meat in and out of her, my real one sliding through her slick cat, the toy stretching her cheeks in counterpoint. Through the harness, I could feel the vibrations of her body, the clench of her muscles around the silicone, the way every deep sent a jolt of pressure through my own meat. The base of the toy rubbed against my lower belly with each stroke, a secondary stimulation that kept me on the razor's edge. Martha completely unraveled. Her head dropped to the mattress, her back bowed, her hips bucked, and her moans became incoherent, fragments of words, gasps of my name, long wailing cries that rose and fell with my rhythm. She came within 30 seconds, then again at 45. Then she stopped counting altogether, lost in a cascade of peaks that merged into one continuous, shuddering release. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto her stomach, and I followed her down, adjusting the angle, keeping both shafts buried as I continued to bang her through the aftershocks. My own climax was building, pressure coiling at the base of my spine, heat spreading through my groin. Martha, I'm close. Her hand reached back urgent, pull out, come in my mouths. I withdrew both shafts as gently as I could. She rolled onto her back, mouth already open, eyes dark with need. I shed the harness, let it fall to the floor, and knelt over her, fisting my meat. She took just the head between her lips, tongue swirling, and I erupted. Thick ropes of juice painted her tongue, the roof of her mouth, her throat. She swallowed every drop, her throat working around each pulse, her eyes locked on mine the whole time. When I was empty, she licked the tip clean and pulled me down for a kiss that tasted of everything we'd done. We stayed like that, tangled, sweat-damp, trembling, until our breathing steadied. Then she pulled the covers over us and curled against my side, her head on my chest. That was the best thing I've ever felt, she murmured. Better than the first time. Everything with you keeps getting better. I kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like lavender and sex. Outside her window, the March wind rattled the glass, but in here, under her purple comforter with her body warm against mine, nothing could touch us. Are there more surprises? I asked. She laughed, a tired, satisfied sound. You have no idea. My eyes closed. Sleep rolled in like a tide, heavy and inevitable, and the last thing I heard before I sank under was Martha's voice, soft and content. Cambridge in late May was green and brick, an impossibly old feeling, like the buildings themselves had absorbed centuries of student ambition and were quietly judging whether we measured up. Our apartment was a third-floor walk-up on a tree-lined street halfway between Harvard Square and MIT, 6 rooms crammed with mismatched furniture and the accumulated detritus of rotating tenants. The walls were thin, the kitchen faucet dripped. The 2 bathrooms had each a clawfoot tub that took 20 minutes to fill. I loved it immediately. Ally and Jen, the lesbian couple who'd answered our roommate ad, met us at the door with a bottle of cheap Prosecco and a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood. Ally was a compact woman with a geometric haircut and a dry wit that made Martha snort laugh within 5 minutes. Jen was taller, softer-spoken, an engineering PhD student who wore flannel shirts and quoted Mary Oliver. Pete and Cam, the straight couple who rounded out our 6-person arrangement, were out for the evening. A date night, Ally explained, which meant they'd be back late and probably loud. They're enthusiastic, Jen said, with the careful diplomacy of someone who'd lived next to them for 2 years. You'll get used to it. Tom and Gary, the departing tenants of what would be our room, had left for a romantic spa weekend in Vermont. Their bed was a queen-sized maple frame with a mattress that had seen better decades, and they'd left fresh sheets for us, a small courtesy that Martha discovered when she flopped onto it and immediately groaned. Oh my God, this mattress has actual springs, not just a board with delusions of grandeur. Better than your twin. Anything's better than my twin. She stretched out, arms above her head, and the hem of her t-shirt rode up to expose a pale strip of stomach. We can actually both fit on this. I dropped our bags by the closet and lay down beside her. We fit on your twin. We made it work. This is different. This is. She turned her head to look at me. This is our room, our apartment, our life. Our life, I repeated. Saturday night, Ally and Jen took us to dinner at a hole-in-the-wall Thai place that served the best pad Thai I'd ever eaten. Martha, who'd been nervous about meeting new people, had relaxed into easy conversation by the time the appetizers arrived. She and Jen discovered a shared obsession with neuroscience podcasts. Ally, a graphic designer, spent 20 minutes describing the book cover she was working on and then grilled me about football concussions with the intensity of an investigative journalist. By the time we walked back to the apartment, arm in arm, Martha was glowing. "They're fantastic," she said. "Ally and Jen, I was worried I wouldn't fit in, that I'd be the weird quiet one again." "You're not the weird quiet one. You're Martha Jones, salutatorian, future biomedical engineer, and the most surprising person I've ever met." She elbowed me. "You're just saying that because you want to get in my pants. Your pants are a secondary objective. The primary objective is making you smile." She smiled. Secondary objective achieved. The apartment was dark when we climbed the stairs, but from behind Pete and Cam's closed door came a rhythmic thumping and a series of high-pitched moans. Martha stopped mid-step, her eyes going wide. "Is that? That would be Pete and Cam, being enthusiastic." A particularly loud cry echoed through the hallway, followed by a male groan and what sounded like a headboard hitting the wall. Ally, who'd come up behind us, let out a bark of laughter. "Every Saturday," she said, not bothering to whisper. "Clockwork, you learn to tune it out." Jen leaned against the doorframe of their room, her expression amused. "Or you don't, and you decide that if they can be loud, so can you." She raised an eyebrow at Martha. "The walls are thin, but the lease doesn't say anything about noise. Tom and Gary set a high bar, just saying." She winked, and then she and Ally disappeared into their room. The thumping next door continued. A series of quick, sharp cries, then a long wail that dissolved into shaky laughter. Martha looked at me. Her eyes had that twinkle, the one I'd learned to recognize months ago, the one that meant she was about to say something that would short-circuit my brain. "Did she just challenge us?" "I think she just challenged us to be louder than Tom and Gary, who were apparently very loud." Martha opened the door to our new room, stepped inside, turned to face me, and in the dim light from the hallway, her expression shifted from amused to something far more focused. "Just watch me." She didn't say it like a joke, she said it like a promise. I closed the door behind us. She was already pulling her shirt over her head, already stepping out of her jeans, already reaching for me with that combination of shyness and absolute certainty that had undone me since the first night in my kitchen. Her bra was black lace, the same set from our first time, or identical to it, and when I unhooked it and let it fall, her melons spilled free, heavy and pale, the nips already tight. "Take off your clothes," she said. "Now." I did. She watched, her breathing quickening, and when I was dressed less, she crossed to me and pushed me backward onto the bed. Then she turned around, planted her hands on the mattress, and looked back over her shoulder at me. From behind, hard and fast, "I want to feel you for days." The view stopped my breath. Her back was a smooth curve, her cheeks round and firm, the cheeks parted enough to reveal everything, her cat already glistening, the pink folds swollen, the tight pucker above it. She wiggled her hips, a deliberate invitation, and I didn't make her wait. I lined up and rode into her in one hard stroke. She cried out loud, no attempt to be quiet, and the sound ricocheted off the bare walls of our new room. I grabbed her hips and set a brutal pace, pounding into her with the pent-up energy of weeks of planning and packing and dreaming about this moment. The headboard slammed against the wall. The mattress springs shrieked. Her melons swung beneath her with each impact, the heavy flesh jiggling in rhythm, and the wet sounds of our bodies meeting filled the room. "Yes, yes, please, Paul. You want them to hear you." "I want everyone to hear me." She was so wet I could feel her peak dripping down my thighs. Her cat gripped me on every stroke, tight and hot, and when I reached around and found her happy button, swollen and hard and slick, she screamed. Not a moan, a scream, raw and ecstatic, her whole body convulsing as the first peak hit. I kept banging her through it, kept rubbing her happy button, and before the spasms had faded, a second one crashed through her, sharper, harder, her cat clamping down so tight I could barely move. "That's two," I growled. "More, don't stop." I gave her more, a dozen more strokes, deep and relentless, and she came a third time with a sobbing cry that dissolved into my name. Her arms gave out. She collapsed onto her elbows, her face pressed into the mattress, and I followed her down, adjusting the angle, driving deeper. "Inside me, come inside me." I buried myself to the hilt and let go. The release was staggering, pulse after pulse of hot juice flooding her cat, and she moaned at the sensation, her inner walls fluttering, milking me dry. I stayed there, still buried, still pulsing, until the last aftershock faded and we both sagged against the mattress. From somewhere beyond the wall, I heard slow clapping. "That was either Pete or Jen," Martha said, her voice muffled by the pillow. "I don't care which." "Round two?" I asked, still inside her, already half-hard again from the sound of her voice. She pushed herself up on her elbows, looked back at me. Her face was flushed, her hair a wild tangle, her smile absolutely wicked. "I want it in my cheeks, there's lube in the nightstand." I pulled out, both of us groaning at the loss, and reached for the drawer. Inside, a small clear bottle, brand new, still sealed. I broke the plastic and squeezed a generous amount into my palm. It was cool at first, then warm, then slick beyond belief as I coated my shaft. Martha had positioned herself on all fours again, her back arched, her cheeks presented. "I'm ready," she said. I pressed a lubed finger against her tight pucker. She exhaled, and the ring of muscle softened, accepting me. I worked her open with one finger, then two, scissoring gently, stretching her with the patience she deserved. She pushed back against my hand, impatient. "Now pull, I want you now." I lined up, the head of my meat pressed against her a-hole, and I pushed. The resistance gave way with a pop, and she gasped, that same sharp, shocked sound from every time before. But she didn't pause, didn't ask for a moment. She shoved backward, taking me to the hilt in one motion that made us both cry out. "Yes, please," her voice was strained but triumphant. "Move, hard like before." I moved, fast and deep, the lube making obscene squelching sounds, her cheeks gripping me with that impossibly tight heat that never got old. I watched my meat disappear into her, watched her cheeks ripple with each impact, watched her hands fist in the sheets as she started to moan again, low at first, then building, then breaking into a scream as another peak tore through her. Her cheeks clenched around me, and the sensation pushed me right to the edge. "Again," she gasped, "I want to come again." I reached around and found her happy button. Already slick, already swollen, and when I rubbed tight circles, she sobbed. Her second peak hit harder than the first, her whole body shaking, her cries going wordless, her cheeks milking me with rhythmic pulses that made my vision blur. "I'm gonna come. In my cheeks, fill me up." I did, buried deep, held there, and emptied myself into her with a groan that echoed off the walls. Pulse after thick pulse of juice filled her tight channel, and she moaned at the sensation, clenching around me, drawing it out until I was empty and trembling. I pulled out slowly, watched the pearly stream leak from her stretched hole, a trickle of white against pink skin. She collapsed onto her stomach, breathing hard, and I flopped down beside her. From beyond the wall, a low whistle, then Ally's voice, muffled but clear. "Okay, that was impressive." Martha laughed into the pillow. "Told you." We rested for maybe 15 minutes, drank water from the bathroom tap, kissed lazily in the dark. Her body warm against mine, her hand tracing patterns on my chest. Then she pushed herself up on one elbow and looked at me with an expression that had become familiar over the months, soft and open and utterly unguarded. "Round 3, she said. "This one's different." "How?" "I want it slow, passionate. I want you to make love to me like it's our first time and our last time all at once." I kissed her, tenderly, deeply, my hand cupping her cheek. "Whatever you want." I laid her on her back, kissed her eyelids, her throat, the hollow of her collarbone, worked my way down to her melons, sucking each nip until she sighed and arched beneath me. Lower still, across her stomach, her hip bones, her inner thighs. She was still wet, still slick with my juice and her own peak, but I didn't enter her yet. Instead, I settled between her legs and kissed her cat with the same reverence I'd kissed her mouth. She tasted like us, salt and sex and something sweet underneath that was just her. I licked her slowly, deliberately, tracing the contours of her folds, dipping inside her, circling her happy button but never quite touching it. She whimpered, her fingers threading into my hair, her hips lifting. "Paul plays. When I'm ready." I made her wait, kept my tongue soft and teasing until she was trembling, until her thighs were shaking against my ears, until the first tears of frustration leaked from the corners of her eyes. Only then did I seal my mouth around her happy button and suck. She came with a gasp, a quiet, shuddering peak that was nothing like the screams from before. Her cat pulsed against my tongue, and I drank her down, swallowing everything she gave me. When the tremors faded, I crawled up her body and positioned myself between her legs. She wrapped them around my waist, her ankles locking at the small of my back. "Like this," she whispered. "I want to see you." I entered her slowly. inch by inch, letting her feel every ridge, every vein, the way her inner walls stretched to accommodate me. Her eyes stayed locked on mine the whole time, and when I was fully seated, she let out a trembling exhale. I love the way you feel inside me. I love being inside you. I started to move, a slow, deep rhythm that was more rocking than robbing, our bodies pressed together from chest to hip. Her melons flattened against my chest, her nips hard points of heat. Her mouth found mine and we kissed as we moved, tender, unhurried, the taste of her still on my lips. Her fingers traced my spine. My hand cupped the back of her head. We were one body, one breath, one heartbeat. She came first. I felt it building in the way her breathing quickened, the way her inner muscles started to flutter, the way her nails pressed into my back. She gasped against my mouth, and her cat clenched around me in waves, and I kept moving through it, drawing it out, feeling her pleasure as if it were my own. My release followed moments later. Not the explosive climax of before, but a deep, rolling wave that started at the base of my spine and spread through my whole body. I spilled inside her with a shuddering sigh, my forehead pressed to hers, her name on my lips. We lay tangled together, still joined, still trembling, until the sweat cooled on our skin and our breathing steadied. I love you, she murmured. I love you too. That was 3. 3, I agreed. Think we were louder than Tom and Gary? I laughed. I think we might have been louder than the entire building. She smiled against my chest. Good. Morning came through the window, pale and golden, carrying the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Martha stirred beside me, her hair a wild tangle, her face creased with pillow marks. She blinked up at me and her lips curved into a sleepy smile. We're in Cambridge. We're in Cambridge. In our apartment. Our room. She stretched and the sheet slipped down to reveal her melons, soft and pale in the morning light. Do I smell bacon? Someone's cooking. We should get up. In a minute. She didn't argue. When we finally emerged from the bedroom, Martha in her sundress and me in jeans and a Harvard t-shirt, Pete and Jen were in the kitchen. Pete, a lanky guy with a perpetual smirk, was at the stove flipping pancakes. Jen was leaning against the counter, mug in hand, her expression deeply amused. She saw us and bowed, a theatrical, flourishing bow. I stand corrected, you were louder than Tom and Gary. Pete turned from the stove, spatula raised in salute. Jude, I'm not even mad. That was impressive. I'm pretty sure I heard Martha come at least. He paused, counting on his fingers. 5 times. Martha turned scarlet. She buried her face in my shoulder, but I could feel her laughing. It was a challenge, she said, her voice muffled against my shirt. Jen said we couldn't be louder than Tom and Gary. I took it personally. Ally appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, her hair sticking up in 17 directions. We're going to have the most interesting lease in Cambridge history, aren't we? Probably, I said. She grinned. Excellent. The rent agreement was signed an hour later, spread out on the kitchen table over cooling pancakes and fresh coffee. 6 signatures, 6 names, 1 apartment. Martha signed hers with a flourish, then looked up at me with that real smile, the one I'd first seen in the library, the one that had undone me completely. 1st of July, she said. 1st of July. Our life. The words settled between us like a promise. And when I leaned over to kiss her, surrounded by pancakes and paperwork and the laughter of our new roommates, I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, deeper than hope, that every step of the road ahead was worth taking. As long as I was taking it with her. The last month of high school passed in a blur of final exams, college paperwork, and stolen moments with Martha. We'd gotten good at the subterfuge, so good that even Dave, who prided himself on knowing everything about everyone's sex lives, had no idea. He'd slap my shoulder in the hallway and ask, "Grav, you getting any? You've been awfully quiet lately," and I'd just shrug and mutter something about studying, which wasn't a lie. I was studying, just not alone and not always books. The GPA race became our private joke. Martha would text me at midnight with a screenshot of her latest quiz score, and I'd fire back a flex emoji in my own. We weren't competing, not really, but the shared drive toward excellence had become another way we fit together. When the final rankings posted, and I saw my name at the top as valedictorian and hers right below as salutatorian, I laughed out loud in the empty computer lab. The nerd and the jock, side by side, just like on that biology project that started everything. Graduation day arrived hot and bright, the kind of June morning where the air felt like warm syrup and everyone's polyester robes stuck to their skin. We were seated on the stage. The entire class of 347 seniors fanned out in folding chairs below us, families packed into the bleachers. I could see my parents near the front, my mother already dabbing her eyes, my father sitting stiff-backed, but with something that might have been pride at the corners of his mouth. Martha's mother was 3 rows behind, Oliver bouncing beside her, waving a little dinosaur figurine. Martha gave the opening speech. She walked to the podium in her black robe, her cap slightly askew, those thick glasses catching the stage lights, and I watched my classmates' faces shift from indifference to surprise as she began to speak. Her voice didn't waver. She talked about the road we'd traveled, the late nights, the doubt, the moments of discovery that happened not in classrooms but in the spaces between. She quoted Carl Sagan, then a line from a poem I didn't recognize, then she looked directly at me for half a heartbeat and said, "We arrive at the end of this road not as the same people who started it. We are braver now. We carry more, but we also carry each other, and that makes all the difference." The applause was genuine. I watched Becca Nguyen, 2 rows back in the graduate section, lean over to Cassie Delacroix and whisper something. Cassie's eyes flicked to me, then back to Martha, and I saw the calculation happening behind her expression. They'd figure it out soon enough. My farewell speech came at the end. I'd practiced it a dozen times in front of Martha's bedroom mirror while she sat cross-legged on her twin bed and critiqued my delivery. More eye contact, less football captain, more human. I talked about the road ahead, college, careers, the terrifying blank canvas of a future we had to paint ourselves. I talked about how high school had taught me that the people who surprise you most are the ones you never saw coming. And then, just before the last paragraph, Martha rose from her seat and crossed the stage to stand beside me. The crowd stirred. Someone in the back, probably Dave, let out a low whistle. She slipped her hand into mine. I finished my last lines with my voice steady, only because her fingers were warm against my palm. Then I turned to her, framed by the podium and the banner that read CONGRATULATONS Class of 2024, and kissed her. Not a peck, not a chaste graduation kiss. I cupped her face in both hands and kissed her the way I'd kissed her that first afternoon in my kitchen, deep and deliberate and full of everything I'd been holding back for months. Her lips parted under mine. Her hand came up to grip the front of my graduation robe. Behind us, the faculty exchanged glances. Below us, the senior class erupted. Oh my God! Grav Ann Jones. I knew it. Since WHEN. Martha pulled back first, her cheeks flaming, her glasses fogged. She was smiling, that real smile, the one she never showed at school, and the sight of it made my chest ache. I kept my arm around her as we walked off the stage together, and the applause that followed us wasn't for the speeches anymore. The party was at Dave's house, a sprawling ranch with a pool and a basement that had survived 4 years of football team debauchery. Martha hesitated at the door, her fingers tightening on my arm, and I felt her whole body tense against my side. "We don't have to stay," I said low just for her. She looked up at me. In the porch light without the graduation robe, she was wearing a simple blue sundress, still modest, still hiding her shape, but the neckline dipped just enough to suggest the curves beneath. She'd taken her glasses off in the car. "No, I want to, everyone's going to look at me." "Let them look, you're mine and I'm yours, that's all they need to know." She exhaled, nodded, we walked in together. The next 2 hours were a blur of handshakes and backslaps, and the same 5 questions asked 20 different ways. How long, since the biology project? She was hiding that under those sweatshirts. "Grav, you dog." Dave cornered me by the keg, his grin so wide it threatened to split his face. "You've been holding out on me, you bastard. For MONTHS. I told you she was hot under all that. I called that sophomore year." "You called nothing. You said she had a nice face, and then you forgot she existed." "Details?" He clapped my shoulder hard enough to make me spill my beer. "Seriously though, she's cool. Quiet but cool, smart as hell, you two make sense." Cassie found Martha by the snack table. I watched from across the room, a spike of protectiveness shooting through my spine, but Cassie's body language was relaxed, curious, not hostile. She said something that made Martha laugh, actually laugh, and then Becca joined them, and within 20 minutes Martha was surrounded by a circle of girls I'd once been intimate with, and they were all talking like they'd been friends for years. Martha caught my eye across the room and gave a tiny shrug, a tiny smile. "See. I'm fine." We stayed 3 hours, danced a little, drank a little more. By the time we called an Uber, Martha was tipsy, her cheeks pink, her steps unsteady, her voice pitched higher and brighter than I'd ever heard it. She leaned her head against my shoulder in the back seat and traced circles on my thigh. "You're valedictorian," she said, like she'd just remembered. "You're salutatorian. We're going to Cambridge, together." "Together?" Her hand crept higher, found my belt buckle, fumbled with it, her fingers clumsy but determined, and I grabbed her wrist before she could get any further. "Martha, we're in an Uber." So, she looked up at me, eyes bright and wicked. He's seen worse, I bet. The driver, a middle-aged man with a resigned expression, adjusted his rearview mirror. I have, actually, but I'd prefer not to add to the collection. Martha dissolved into giggles. I pulled her hand up and kissed her knuckles. Soon, I said against her skin, just wait. Her mother's house was dark when we arrived. I paid the driver, guided Martha up the sagging front steps, and had to catch her when she stumbled on the threshold. She pressed her face into my chest and laughed, the sound muffled against my shirt. "SHHH, your mom's asleep." Mom's a heavy sleeper, like the dead. But she lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper, and we crept through the living room like burglars, past the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon, up the narrow staircase where the fourth step creaked and we both froze, then kept going, stifling laughter. Her bedroom door closed behind us with a soft click. And then she was on me. Her mouth found mine in the dark, hot and urgent, tasting of cheap beer and the cherry lip gloss she'd reapplied in the Uber. Her hands went to my shirt, yanking it up, and I had to grab her wrists again just to slow her down. "Easy. I've been waiting for hours." She worked my buttons anyway, her fingers more dexterous now, driven by determination. They kept talking to us, so many people. I just wanted to be alone with you. I let her strip my shirt, let her push me backward until my knees hit the edge of her twin bed and I sat down hard. She stood over me, breathing fast, and in the moonlight slanting through her window I could see her clearly, the flush on her cheeks, the muss of her honey-colored hair, the way her sundress strap had slipped off one shoulder. "You're so beautiful," I said. She froze, even tipsy, even desperate. The words hit her differently than any touch could. Her expression softened. Her hands, which had been reaching for my belt, came up to frame my face instead. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Come here." I undressed her slowly, not the frantic shedding of clothes from our first time, not the practiced efficiency we'd developed over months. I took my time, slid the sundress strap down her other shoulder, let the fabric pool at her feet. She wasn't wearing a bra, her melons settled free, heavy and pale, the nips tightening in the cool air. I kissed each one before I moved lower, my hands finding the waistband of her panties, simple white cotton tonight, not the lace she wore when she planned ahead, and easing them down her thighs. She stepped out of them, stood dressless before me, trembling slightly, and I knelt to press my lips to her stomach, her hip, the neat triangle of her lower belly. She was already clean bare, smooth and warm, and when I breathed against her she made a sound that was almost a whimper. "Paul, please. Lie down." She did. Her twin bed was too small for both of us really, but we'd learned to make it work. I stretched out beside her, propped on one elbow, and began a slow pilgrimage across her body with my mouth, her eyelids, the hollow of her throat, her collarbone, the ridge of it sharp under my tongue. I kissed down her sternum and between her melons, then moved to the right one, taking the nip in my mouth with the gentlest pressure. She sighed, her spine curving, her fingers threading into my hair. I switched to the left melons, giving it the same attention, and her hips started to shift against the mattress. "I need you inside me," she breathed. "Soon. I need you now." Soon, I kissed lower, her ribs, the soft plane of her stomach, rising and falling with quickening breath, her hip bones sharp and elegant, her inner thighs which fell open for me without resistance, exposing the glistening pink of her cat to the moonlight. She was drenched, the folds swollen and slick, her happy button already peeking from its hood, the delicate inner labia spread like petals. Her scent rose to meet me, musky and sweet. I kissed her there, once, a soft press of lips to her happy button, and she jolted like I'd touched her with electricity. "Paul." I licked her, a long, slow stripe from her entrance to her happy button, and the taste of her flooded my tongue, salty and tangy and unmistakably Martha. She moaned, her thighs clamping against my ears, her hips lifting off the bed. I settled in and worked her with patience that bordered on cruelty. Circles around her happy button, gentle suction, 2 fingers sliding inside her, curling forward to find that rough patch on her anterior wall. She was so wet my fingers made obscene sounds, and when I added a third, she gasped and grabbed the headboard. "Please, please, I want you inside. I want to come on your meat." "One more minute. Now." I gave her happy button one final, firm stroke of my tongue, and she shattered. Her cat clenched around my fingers, pulsing in rhythmic waves, and a flood of warm fluid soaked my hand, my chin, the sheets beneath her. She cried out, too loud, definitely too loud, and I had to muffle her with a kiss as the peak rolled through her. Her body shook, her nails dug into my shoulders. When the tremors finally subsided, she was gasping and laughing at the same time. "That was your." "I know." I knelt between her legs. She was still pulsing, still sensitive, and when I guided the head of my meat against her entrance, she whimpered, but her legs wrapped around my waist, and her ankles locked at the small of my back, and she pulled me in. The first inch made us both groan. She was so tight after her peak, hot and swollen and gripping, her inner walls adjusting around my shaft with that familiar, exquisite resistance. I pushed deeper, inch by slow inch, until I was buried to the hilt, and our lower belly pressed together. "Look at me," I said. She opened her eyes, hazel glassy, pupils blown wide, her lips were parted. Her cheeks were wet. I hadn't noticed the tears, but they were there, tracking into her hairline. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect, you're perfect, don't stop." I started to move, a slow, deep rhythm that let me feel everything, the heat of her, the silky grip of her walls, the way her hips rolled to meet mine on every stroke. Her melons swayed with the motion, the undersides catching the moonlight, and I lowered my mouth to one nip while my hand found the other. Sucked, flicked. She arched beneath me, her breathing gone ragged again, her inner muscles starting to flutter. "You're going to come again," I said, not a question. Yes, I'm." "Let go, I've got you." She did. Her second peak was quieter than the first. A gasp, a shudder, her cat clamping down around me in pulses that dragged me right to the edge. I felt my own release building, the pressure coiling at the base of my spine, the heat spreading through my groin. "Inside," she whispered, "always inside." I went deep and let go. The climax hit me like a wave, hot jets of juke pumping into her in thick pulses, and she moaned at the sensation, her legs tightening around me, her body accepting everything I gave. I kept moving through it, drawing it out, until I was empty and trembling and utterly spent. I collapsed onto her. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders and held me, and we lay like that, still joined, both slick with sweat, her heart hammering against my chest, until our breathing slowed. "I love you," she said into my neck. "I love you too." Was I too loud? Is Mom awake? I listened, the house was silent. We're safe. She laughed, a tired, satisfied sound. Good, because I want to do that again tomorrow.